Hey, hi. In this video, I will help you to understand the GitHub Actions from basics to advanced. So in this video, we will see what is GitHub Actions, how the GitHub Actions works, what are all its features, and how it is used in the enterprise. And then finally, we also see a couple of demos on the GitHub Actions. So here, this is a tutorial that can help you to understand the GitHub Actions from scratch to end, and eventually it will help you to use the same GitHub Actions in your production workload as well. Now, first, we're gonna first understand what is GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions is a CI/CD tool that is built in with you in the GitHub. GitHub is a version control tool and which will help you to store the your source code. Within that source code repository, you have another feature called GitHub Actions. So GitHub Action is basically a CI/CD automation tool that is built within the GitHub. It automates the software development workflow as well. So as you see in this pictures, this is the logo of GitHub Actions. How does it actually help us to build the CI/CD plan? Pipeline is something like this. So you have a plan, where the developers will be developing the code, they will build and do a testing. So that cycle continuously, goes on. And similarly, in the continuous delivery process, you're going to do a continuous testing, continuous releasing, and then do a deployment again, right? So in these CI/CD activity, there is a pattern to follow, and that pattern is now automated by GitHub Actions. Now, again, it is actually runs the workflows based on the triggers like code commit, PRs, and the scheduled event as well. So not only just you can think it as an automation tool, but it also has an extra capabilities like this workflow can be made to trigger with a certain instances, like when somebody uh, commits the code, somebody raises the PR or schedules the event. Basically, it's can be made to run based on a certain events. Now it also supports the custom and community contributed actions. So basically, in the GitHub action, so as it is a CI/CD automation tool, in the CI/CD automations, you have to deal with lot of steps. The steps like cloning, building, then running the commands, running the scripts, maybe running the binaries, running the jar files, right? So basically, it actually supports the custom created and the community created actions. So when I say actions, is nothing but it's a features within the GitHub action workflow which can help you to do that activity automatically. So that is what, and how does that work? So I'm going to show you in this video. Now this is what it all about. Now let's go to the workflows. Let's try to understand what is workflow, what is the GitHub actions workflow here, right? So as you see in the right hand side, that is an example GitHub action workflows. So you see that it is an YAML file, and that YAML file has a declarative syntax. Now I'm going to help you to understand what is this declarative syntax and what is this each the key value pairs in this YAML file mean for, right? And basically it actually defines, in the sense this YAML file defines the workflow which is used for automations, and that is written in a YAML file, where it is written in the GitHub repository in a folder called .github/workflow. So .github/workflow is a reserved folder structure name in the GitHub, and that's where you're gonna write your YAML file with your own file names, ending with extension either YAML file or .yaml file. Right now, let's try to dig down this GitHub Actions workflow. So it actually has a certain properties in it. One is a trigger. Trigger defines when this workflow has to run. Job is basically it is the group of task. It executes a task in a sequential or in a parallel manner. The next one is steps. The steps is basically individual command within the job, in the sense, as you know that the club of steps is nothing but a job, right? And what is a job? Then job is basically execute which executes the task basically in a sequential or in a parallel manner. Now let's look at the right hand side. As you see my cursor here, so this is an example workflow file name, that is .yaml file, and this has these many properties. The first one is event, job, runner, steps, actions, and the secrets. So far now I'm going to walk you through the theoretically, but we will also see in real time demo as well, once I go to that particular step. So far now let's understand theoretically. So this event, so basically what are types of the events? The event could be webhook events like pull request, issues, pushes as well, then the scheduled event, and then the manual event as well. So here you see that the first property is basically name, which is nothing but name of your GitHub action. On is nothing but at what kind of event this action has to be triggered. That is, here we have defined push, and then we go down to the jobs. So you see that job is basically, it's another property, and it comes with a lot of its own the key value pairs. So it contains a build as another job name here. So what is that comes below is a job name, and then it comes the properties of the runner, that is name of the job and where the job is supposed to run, and that is where the runner comes in picture. Runner is nothing but it's a machine in which this GitHub action workflow is executing. In the sense here you are declaring it in a declarative language, but those declaration has to be converted into an executable actions, and where it has to be executed, that is the a machine. The machine is called as a GitHub runner. And here the GitHub provides a by default GitHub runner like Ubuntu latest, Windows latest, something like that. And also you can create your own runners, that is called as a self-hosted runner, which we gonna cover up in a little bit more detail in the next slides. For now, we go to the next property, that is steps. The steps is, as I said, it is basically a job is a club of steps, right, or basically a group of steps. And that is where the steps is basically, it's initiation of execution of those steps in one, in an order, and that is where it binds to all together. And that's where the actions, you see that. So the action contains normally a name and users. Users is a keyword that is actually points to the GitHub action. So generally you see that whatever you see the keyword called users and action forward slash, that's where basically it's an annotation that GitHub actions points to some other piece of code that has to be executed when this particular step is executed. In the sense, for now it looks very simple, but when the GitHub action uses this kind of acronym and points to something which is reserved actions, in the backend it performs that kind of action. So here it is actually checkout. You see that action forward slash checkout at the right version 2. So in the backend it has the code which is needed to do this particular task, that is check out the code. And that is where this the users talks about. So likewise there are a lot of users actions in place which will be used in building the GitHub actions workflows. Now let's go to the linting one. So this is basically oftenly used lint code base is the name. It uses the GitHub provided and forward slash. This is the the point where the GitHub linting code is being drawn, and that will perform this particular activity. Next comes the secrets. So secrets is nothing but secrets and environmental is nothing but another topic altogether, which is need to be understood. So I'm going to walk you through that in the next slides. So for now, this is all about understanding the workflow in very detail. So we have defined all these. So basically, you need to know triggers, jobs, steps, and actions, right? So we deal with the triggers, jobs, and jobs contains the steps contains the actions, right? So all these you need to know when you understand the GitHub Actions workflow. Now let's go to the one example, that is build your first workflows. Now I have already built a first workflows, and here I have taken the screenshot. I'm going to understand that here by theoretically, and then we're going to see that demo after some time. So here, to create your first GitHub action workflow, so you have to create a folder called .github forward slash workflows, then give your file name and ending with YAML or just YML. In the sense, you need to create an YAML file underneath the folder called .github small letter forward slash workflows small letters and forward slash the YAML file. And then you're gonna use the commit and push to trigger this particular workflow. So now you see that this is the my code base, and it's basically it is there in my VS Code. Now let me first walk you through this one, which is equivalent to going taking you to the VS Code and explaining, right? So that's the reason I have taken this screenshot. So here let's try to build our own first workflow. So how do I build it? I'm just going to walk you through here. Now just follow my cursor here. So here if you see that we have we have cloned a repository called GitHub Action OIDC Connect. You see that here. And within that repository, currently we are in a main branch. If you understand the VS Code, You follow my cursor and you will understand it. Now in this GitHub action workflows, so right now we are building the GitHub action workflow from a scratch. Then that's where I'm trying to walk the each element by element of the GitHub actions. The first one is the name. You need to give the name of your GitHub action. That is where I have given here it as AWS OIDC Connect demo. So here I'm going to show you like how you can use the OIDC connector to connect to the AWS account and do your deployment or do whatever you want to do from the GitHub actions. Generally we do CI, that is continuous integration, which is meant to build your code, deploy, which is actually is to deploy your code into the targeted the hosting environment, right? So here that's where the names comes here. So name you have written on is nothing but event. On what event this the workflow has to run. So here push, what does that mean? What does that mean? Push is basically when somebody commits the code and does the upstream sync, right? Push is nothing but upstream sync in the VS Code terminology, which is basically pushing the code into the upstream. Then you are actually declaring the local environment variable. Local environment variable is nothing but local to the particular GitHub action workflows. So here we are declaring a variable called AWS region and the value equal to US West 1. So this is basically a static variable that is declared in this particular GitHub action workflow, right? So generally you can think like that, the GitHub action workflow is equal to a programming file. Say you are executing a Python script, right? And the script has, script execute the code from top to bottom. So that is where, it is doing here. So when you execute the script can contain the variables, it can contains the, the maybe the parameters, right? So that's all happens in the even in the GitHub actions as well. So basically GitHub action basically uses the program execution theory, and this is how you execute a code. It's the same thing that you do in the GitHub actions as well. So when you execute a GitHub actions, it's equivalent to you are executing a program file like that. Now let's go to the next part, that is permission. So permission is kind of one of the the name that you have to understand when you use the OIDC connect. OIDC connect is basically OpenID connect, which will work on a JWT token. That's the reason to provide the token access. We actually annotate something in the GitHub action that is called permissions. ID token equal to write and content equal to read. So basically this is something specific to the OIDC connect, that is we are declaring here as well. So basically GitHub actions also works, supports that as well. Now let's go down to the important part, that is job. A workflow will definitely have a job, basically jobs. Okay, so jobs is nothing but it's a group of jobs as well. So basically underneath the one title called jobs, you can create a multiple jobs. Generally we will have one job or two job, but again based on the complexity of CI/CD pipelines, the jobs can have multiple job underneath that. So for now here we are creating only one job called demo OIDC. That is my at the row number 10, that is my job name. Run on is basically it's actually talking about where is this code is going to be executed, where is this particular program file is going to be executed. That is run on Ubuntu latest. Then we go for the steps. Steps is again, as I said, a job has a list of tasks and that is clubbed as a steps, and that is where we are doing here. Now here in the steps, as I explained, it actually uses the GitHub actions. So GitHub actions are pointing to a particular actions that has to perform in that particular tasks. So one action here is clone the GitHub repository, that is the name, and it uses this particular GitHub actions. Next one is configure the AWS credentials. So here I'm using the OIDC credentials, so that's the reason this is the syntax. So I have to use AWS actions / configure AWS credentials at the rate version 1 and with the parameters. So these are the parameters I have to follow, that is the role to assume. Remember here I'm actually using the the variables secret and environment, which I would like to show you when I do go for a demo. So for now, as you see here, so this is how we're gonna this is how you see that here, this is how we're gonna reference the variables of the repository. This is how we're gonna reference the secret of the repository, right? That is, you see that role assume equal to this one. Then the secret is, this is how we're going to reference, and the environmental variable that is referenced from here, right? So I have shown you all the three types of references that can be used. One is secret references, the other one is the variables. It could be environmental variable, it could be the repository variables, and then the region, which is basically environmental variables. And then finally we are running a few actions, are basically running a AWS CLI command and also running the and also running the certain commands. So here note that GitHub Actions come with a default AWS CLI installed in it. That is very good thing of GitHub Actions. And that's where I was able to run these the AWS CLI. Now before that, let's go to the next part of this particular theory. Then I'm going to show you everything on the GitHub repository at one shot. Let's go to the next topic, that is trigger and events. I think we have already covered this one. So basically, a trigger is basically which will define how this GitHub Actions workflow will be initiated for execution. That is triggers, right? And trigger contains a trigger will be done based on events. What are all the events? Events can be a scheduled one. Events can be based on the pull request. Events can be based on a manual trigger, right? There are a lot of things that can happen trigger. So here you see that push and pull request to automate the build. So that is also one approach to trigger the GitHub action workflow. So as you see in the right hand side, triggered based on the scheduled event. So this is how you're going to write the your GitHub action workflow with this particular syntax, saying like on schedule and use a crons, right? Schedule can use a cron expressions to trigger a workflow at a specific time or a day, right? Then that's where we have seen the schedule cron job that runs the workflow on schedule, right? Push and pull request, which automates the build and test as well generally. The next one is manual. So manual is basically, there is one annotation if you see in the screenshot here at the line number 10, that is workflow dispatch. If you use on keyword of a GitHub action, you use the workflow underscore dispatch, which means that the GitHub action understand that this has to be invoked manually as well. So we're going to see that as well now. So that is where it talks about manual trigger the workflow. Then the repository events. What are all repository events? Like issue, command, release, pull request. So those are all nothing but repository events. So that is how you can the trigger the GitHub Actions workflows in general. Now let's go for the GitHub runner. So as I was talking previously on the GitHub runners, so GitHub runner, you can use the self-hosted GitHub runners or Microsoft hosted GitHub runners. What is Microsoft hosted GitHub runners? Because GitHub belongs to the Microsoft and GitHub Action also belongs to the Microsoft, right? So you can use the Microsoft hosted agents like the Ubuntu latest, right? That's what we have seen. Or you can build your own GitHub Action machine on the on-premises or cloud or anywhere, right? So I have created a video called how to run the GitHub Actions on Azure and also on AWS. I have a dedicated video for that. You can also explore about in detail about that. For now, I'm just trying to help you like how we use the different GitHub Actions. Okay, so here GitHub hosted runners, so managed by GitHub or Microsoft because that is a parent company. It could be using the Ubuntu, Mac OS or Windows as we seen here. So you see that is run on Ubuntu latest, run on Windows latest. So basically it talks about you can use the GitHub hosted runner. The next one is a self-hosted runner. So you see that it's a self-hosted runner, and in the run on underneath the build on run on, you're gonna use your own self-hosted runners, which I'm going to also show you in the final demo of the part. Okay, so here the GitHub action, basically a machine where this workflow is getting executed, can be managed by GitHub, or you can build your own machines and use that machine to execute that particular GitHub actions. The second method, that is self-hosted, is considered as more secure because you have a full control on that one. But again, from the cost perspectives, from the speed perspective, I would also recommend the GitHub hosted runners, which is secure, by the way. But again, to be more concise and more secure, you have to use the self-hosted runners. So we have discussed now self-hosted runner, that is custom environment for controlling the security and all. Okay, now let's go for the next one, that is building a CI/CD pipeline. So as you see in this diagram, so what is a CI/CD pipeline? First, let's understand and how the GitHub Actions plays a role here. So continuous integration, basically, you see that. Let's try to talk about with this reference with this diagram, and we understand what is a CI and what is a CD. So here is the developers. They are working on a Python Flask application, right? What they do is, they are doing a Python code, and they run a piece of, the function within that, a source code, and now they want to commit it. And that's where they do a commit and sync to the upstream branch with using the VS Code. And that is basically what it's actually continuously integrating your code into the upstream. That is actually called as a continuous integration. So what does that continuous integration will lead to? A developer confirms the development of a code and commits that code into the upstream branch. say that, hey, this is the piece of code, I'm confident, I want to go for the next step. That is actually called as a, you are continuously integrating it for something. So once you integrate it into the upstream, it will have its own trigger points. That is, it can invoke its own build, and that's where you can test that particular build as well, right? So you see that that's where it goes to the next point, that is triggers the workflow, because you have did a push to the repository, and your workflow has the trigger on push. So that's where your GitHub action workflow will be running, right? And that's where your source code gets built. Now there is a one more step here, that is you deploy to the hosting environment, that is say Azure Web App here, or AWS. Maybe you consider that you are hosting that application in the AWS EKS as well. So that's where that's where the deployment is talks about, in the sense you are deploying that into the hosting environment, and finally the user will see that. So that is under the hood at a very layman level. This is the diagram you have to have in your mind when you talk about CI/CD, right? So that's where CD is nothing but deploying apps automatically on merger. Let's go for the jobs and steps. I think we have covered it a lot, but let me go a little bit deeper here and we try to understand. So as you see here, there are two pictures which depicts about the jobs and steps. Let's first look at the right hand side job. In the sense, you see that as I talked earlier, jobs is nothing but it's a first the property of the GitHub action. Jobs talks about, it binds the multiple jobs in a particular workflow, right? Jobs can have a multiple jobs, and you can declare those jobs below that, like something here. So here we have a jobs, and then we are creating a job 1 and job 2, right? And each job can have its own independent properties, like run on steps, like that. Okay, so here you see that you can have a run on equal to Ubuntu latest in the job 1. In job 2, no one is stopping you, you can use the Windows latest as well as the run on, right? And then the step number 2, that is steps. The steps is where it's basically commands within a job. It talks about commands that you are executing in a serial manner to reach to a particular job output. In the sense, a job is meant to deliver certain things, right? And that's where you are breaking that job into small steps. And when the last steps is gets executed, which means that job is completing, right? Like that's how it actually jar downs to. Now talk about the let's talk about the job 2, that is needs. Basically you can also put a certain conditions here, that is called as a needs. So within the jobs you can also have a conditions that can actually checks the previous, if the previous job is completed, then only the second job can be executed. So there are the conventions that is allowed in the GitHub actions to achieve the certain scenarios, that is called as a conditions. And conditions is driven by a keyword called needs. You can explore more about that. Then the run on Ubuntu as well, right? Now let's try to see the diagram that is in the left hand side. So let's try to jot down here. So we have a repository, then within that repository we have a folder called .github and /workflows in small letter. Then you have the different GitHub actions workflow. So underneath that folder, no one told you to keep only one file. You can create n number of work files as per your need, right? And each workflows files are different, and they are meant to do their own jobs, and they can run in a parallel as well, right? And then so each workflows can have multiple jobs defined, like as I explained in the right hand side. And then the jobs can also have further steps. So likewise it applies for the another workflow file. Okay, so this is the thing that I am trying to articulate here to understand what is jobs and steps in the GitHub actions. Let's go on to the next one, that is secret and securities. So as you see in this the right hand side diagram, so that is actually a snapshot of the the GitHub actions settings. And in that one, so if you go to the settings and go for the secret and variable in the actions, you see that there are two things here. One is the repository secrets, then the environmental secrets, and the right side there is a variables. So basically GitHub secrets is nothing but it is a place where you are meant to store the secrets that is needed to execute the GitHub action workflows. That is like storing API keys or credentials in a secure way. The next one is environmental variables. So environment is talks about a GitHub action workflow is meant to run on a different environments like dev, test, and prod. So again, based on the environment you created, within that environment you can bifurcate the secrets. So that is where the environmental variables is talks about. In the sense, you can create a 3D environment, and within that environment you can keep your environmental variables and your environment secrets. That is where the environment will be used, right? And that's all about the secrets and securities. Let's go for the matrix build and caching. Now, let me talk about what is metrics and what is the caching here. So basically, metrics build is which is meant for running the jobs across multiple configurations. So you see that in the strategies, so that comes underneath the job. So strategies talks about metrics. Metrics talks about like say there is a scenario where you have a piece of source code that you need to build with using the different version and run it across, right? And that is where this the matrix build is coming in picture to help you, so which is actually runs the job across multiple configurations like node version configurations. That's where this comes in picture. Example, to test on a multiple node.js version, you can use this kind of metrics build the workflows, which is highly complex thing that I would say, and it has its own unique the space of use cases, right? And that's where this comes in picture. So this is applied for very complex application that is managed on a GitHub Actions. Next one is caching. So caching is about, it's again talks about, as the name says, caching. You can also cache the build to actually speed up your workflow for the second time, third time, fourth time. For the first time, when you write the GitHub Action workflow, consider that there is a build which takes like 30 minutes, 40 minutes for some XYZ steps, right? Now, every time when you run the GitHub action, you don't need to wait for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, right? You can cache that activity and go for the next step. That is the after 40 minutes, what is the next task it has to do in? And that is where the caching comes in picture to speed up the build actually. So how to use it? You can also use it something like this. If you see here, that is cache can be used within the GitHub action workflows. Now let's talk about the reusable workflow. So what is the reusable workflow? Is nothing but it's again like modularization concept that comes in a programming. In the programming, you can write the modules. Modules can be imported in the source code. That is an example Python code, right? For example, say we are actually we are actually executing some math. If we are importing the math module, from the math module we can do adds, subtracts directly, or do a lot of complex functions can be automatically achieved, right? So same concept comes in picture of the reusable workflows. So basically you can modularize your workflow for reusability purpose. As you see here, so here is the engineer GitHub Actions color file. So here what you do is you will write a the GitHub Action workflows called as a caller file, and within that caller workflow file, you will reference that the another workflow file that is kept in somewhere repository 1, 2, 3, something like that, or you can do a combination of all those as well. And that is how you're going to write the reusable workflow. In the sense, the workflow that is written in the application repository 1, 2, 3 are used by XYZ person, right? While this is only possible if there is a generic workflow being written and that is being used by the consumers. Like in Terraform, you can define the Terraform deploy as one workflow file. Within that workflow file, you can do a Terraform init, Terraform plan, and Terraform apply, right? So everywhere, wherever you go, you can reuse these the commands when you execute a Terraform. Now in the caller side, what you do is you just reference that workflow file, and it does the job of Terraform invocation, which is Terraform init, Terraform plan, and Terraform apply in a sequential manner. So I have also covered this concept in my another dedicated video, which is very lengthy, very highly famous video. I would recommend you to check that, how to use the reusable workflow on the GitHub Actions for more details. So I'm gonna recommend to watch that video to understand this concept, right? This is basically an advanced level, so I would recommend to use that. And that's where you see that reusable workflow repository, like building a CI stage, testing the CI stage, whatever you wanted to. There is a repeated activity, so that you want to be reused. That is where you declare a particular file for that. That is particular workflow file that, and that workflow file is referenced in the caller workflow. That is actually called as a shared CI workflows, right? Called in the another workflow. So very simple, something like this. If you see here, so here what we are doing is we are creating a workflow file called jobs, and let's call that job as a caller reusable. So how are we doing that? It just references the workflow that is written in the some other repository, which is I imply in this particular diagram, right? And that's all about the reusable workflow. So now let's go for the next one, that is deploy to AWS with GitHub Actions. So here I'm going to show you the demo. When I show this demo, I'm going to cover up all the points that we have seen in this particular walkthrough in the demo part. So be patient and watch here. Let's try to understand what is that we're going to see in the demo. So here I'm going to show you like how we can do a code commit and push to the upstream, which will trigger the GitHub Actions based on the event. We see that. We check how the GitHub Action workflow files is referencing the secrets environmental variables, right? We also see the the how it is actually doing a deployment just by mimicking by that is taking the access of AWS cloud, right? And here we are using the OpenID Connect, or basically OIDC Connect, to achieve this particular scenario. Now let's go for a demo, and from there I'm going to show you all those things in a real term now. Okay, so this is the repository that we are demoing now. So that is GitHub Action OIDC Connect. So here I'm going to show you like in a demo of the GitHub Actions while I walk you through the end-to-end part of the GitHub Actions. So first one, as I shown you in the PPT walkthrough. So this is the repository which I have cloned through, and this is the GitHub Action file we have written here. Currently we are in the main file. Now as part of the demo, let me again quickly walk you through here. That is basically we have written a name. Basically this GitHub Action workflow file name is something like demo. So here let me call it as a GA, which is I'm just editing this particular work file so that it gets triggered. So this is workflow file gets triggered based on the event that is on push. The environmental variable here is the EU West 2. Then the permission is, this is the permissions, which is because here we are using the OIDC Connect. Then we saw the jobs, that is demo OIDC Connect, and it runs on the GitHub managed GitHub runners. The steps are nothing but it basically clones this particular repository. It actually establishes the the OIDC Connect. Again, to understand how the OIDC Connect is set, I have made a dedicated video which is very viral on my channel. You can explore on AWS OIDC Connect. How we can use that AWS OIDC Connect, which is a best secure approach on the GitHub Action that you can use it for taking the access on the AWS account. And then we are running a few example AWS ALI command, which is actually mimics the deployment activity. As simple as that. Very simple. And here I wanted to show you like how you can reference the secrets, how you can reference the environment, right? So in the local, so here we have declared a local variable called AWS region, and that is what being used here, right? And then we have a secret that is kept in the role name. Then there is a repository variable called ARN. Now I'm going to show you that how did I do that. For now, let's try to save this particular change and do a stage, and then we're gonna commit it by doing a giving a commit message. When I do a commit and then click on a sync, which is nothing but you are pushing the changes to the upstream. So when the pushing the changes to the upstream, the GitHub action should be invoked. Let's see if our GitHub action is invoked. So now I will take you back to the particular repository, and I click on action. So you see that in this repository that is called as a GitHub Action OIDC Connect. So this is the code pane, and after that there is an action pane. So the action pane is the space where you see the GitHub Actions. So looks like just now I triggered it and it has executed in a blink of eyes. That is nothing but now. Let's try to explore it and see what it do it actually, right? So when I open this one, it sees that since the job, you see this particular rectangular box, it depicts a one job. If you create a multiple job, likewise the lot of tabs will be created, right? Lot of rectangles will be created, and the jobs, you see that the jobs will be listed here. So now we are exploring the job. The first one is setup. So what is the setup is basically it's a default task that always gets added in your workflow, and that is what it happens. The first task in my job is clone, which is cloning the repository. Then the next one is configure the credential, which is OIDC Connect. It is doing that job as well, right? And then comes the I'm just executing the AWS CLI command, that is print the AWS SSM parameter, which is doing if when I run this particular command, it is giving the output called Cloud Quick Labs, which is my channel name. Then the print assume role. So this is actually doing a AWS STS get caller identity, which is also being done. And then these are all the next three activities are nothing but default activity that gets added to a job. That is post configure AWS credentials, post git clone repository, and complete the job. Now this GitHub action has run as expected. Now let's go to the settings and try to explore a little bit more around the secrets. When you click on this one, so there are a lot of activities that you can do it here, especially around GitHub Actions and also plus management as well. So in the go to the code automation bar, and that is where you see the actions. So underneath the actions, whatever you want to do, you can do here. So click on a general here. So this is what basically on the GitHub Actions, you can do many things like actions and permissions can be managed here by reference this one. Then the artifact and log retention policies can be done. Then the approval for runner folks, fork pull requests can also be done here. Workflow permissions, everything can be managed in the general pane. Let's go for the runners. So runners is nothing but, as I said, so if you have any self-hosted runner, you can, that will be listed here, and you should use that name in your GitHub Action workflow, and GitHub Actions will automatically run your workflows on that particular GitHub runner, right? So here we have used GitHub, GitHub hosted runner, right? If you want to know more about how to host the self-hosted runner on AWS and Azure, you can search videos on my channel. You will get that. The next one is basically we go for the environment. So environment is nothing but, again, this is the space in the GitHub Actions where you can bifurcate the environment like dev, test, dev, the release and prod. So here you can create the the environment based on your needs. Say for example, you can create environment like dev here, right? So when I create a dev environment, right, within that environment you can further, it basically gives you a slot. Slot is nothing but, it's targeting to a particular environment where you can do a deployment. So once you click on the environment called dev, and again you're gonna get a further the configuration capabilities like deployment productions. You can do a save productions role, and here you can also add the secret that is belongs to the particular environment here. So here you can create a as I said, you can create the environmental secret that is belongs to the dev environment. So as I said, I have given a very detailed explanation about this particular multiple environment, multiple reusable workflows on the GitHub Actions. I have a dedicated video which I would redirect to actually to study that. Right now, this is the here we have created one example environment called dev, and we created the environment. So here you can create a secrets, and also you can create an environmental variable from here. So that is about environments. Okay, now let's go for the security aspects. In the security, we have talked about secrets and the variables. Now in that one, you go for the actions, and that's where you're gonna keep the secrets. So here we have created a repository secret. When you create a repository secret, this can be used for any workflows, right? Environmental secrets, basically it is belongs to a particular environment like that. So here we have the the repository secret called role. So to create a secret, you can click on this particular button, and you provide the secret name, say like test as the name, and the value equal to just say value. All right, so you can keep the secret like this, and that's how you're going to reference so the test can be referenced here in the GitHub Actions by using the secrets.test. So here you can use the tests, something like this, right? So this is how it works basically. Let me do a Control G here. So now this is how you're going to create a secret and use it in a workflow. Let's go for the another one, that is the variable, that is variables. So variable talk about three. There are two types of variable. Environmental variable is talking about whether it is a dev environmental variable, whether it is a prod, whether it is a release, like that. But when you talk about the repository, it applies for all the environments like that. So here I have created a repository. So that is called as a the repository variable. So it is same thing like we do for secret, but here there is no the thing of encryption here. So when it is a secret, the GitHub Actions make it encrypted and stored somewhere. So here you can create action variables like this, which is called as a repository variable. Repository variable is accessible across all the environment, while environmental variable is only available on the environmental workflow. So to understand the environmental workflow, I'm recommending you to see the another video. All right. So now this is what I have shown you the things need to be shown in this video. Finally, this the reference of this particular workflow file will be provided in the video's description. You can use it. So I have not given you a live demo of writing and typing this one, not needed, because I'm giving you the file. You can use it and try it from your side. Alright, so with that note, thank you very much for watching my videos. Kind request, please do subscribe my channel. That would really encourage me a lot. With that note, thank you, and see you in the next video.